I stood there frozen, my heart pounding as I overheard my son's voice, soft, cruel, and meant only for the walls to hear. She won't last the year. Just smile and nod. His words sliced through the room, colder than the winter air outside. Smile and nod. After all the years, after everything I sacrificed, I had become nothing more than a burden they were waiting to get rid of. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The hallway was dim except for a thin strip of amber light leaking from the half-closed den door. Evelyn had been on her way to grab the laundry basket she'd left by the stairs, but she froze when she caught the low hum of voices. Mark's voice, steady, practiced, spilled into the hall, hushed but sharp enough to sting. "Don't worry, Dana. We'll get the house sooner than later." For a moment, Evelyn wondered if she'd misheard, if the words had folded themselves wrong inside her ears. But then Dana's laugh rang out, soft, clipped, and colder than any winter draft the old house had ever let through its windows. Exactly. Patience just makes the reward sweeter. Evelyn's hand, still clutching the stair rail, went clammy. She felt her knees loosen as if the bones beneath her skin had turned to water. The den's shadows seemed to grow, the crack of light suddenly too harsh, slicing across the hallway like a blade. She stepped back carefully, toes pressing into the faded carpet, every movement calculated so that the floorboards wouldn't betray her. When she reached the corner, she pressed her back to the wall, chest rising too fast. The words ricocheted through her head, louder than her heartbeat, impossible to steady. "Get the house." The phrase kept replaying, cruelly simple like a nail tapping against glass. She smoothed her face as best she could before slipping back toward the kitchen. Dinner was already waiting, pot roast on the table, steam clouding the overhead light. The smell, once comforting, now clung to her throat like smoke. Mark sat at the head of the table, posture crisp, his tie loosened as if he'd just shed the day's burdens. Dana leaned casually against the counter, scrolling on her phone as if she belonged in the room more than Evelyn ever had. Evelyn lowered herself into her chair, careful not to glance at either of them too long. Her hands fidgeted beneath the tablecloth, tugging at the hem of her sweater until she forced them still. "Everything okay?" Mark asked, looking up from his plate. His tone was neutral, but his eyes searched hers for too long. She forced her lips into something that resembled a smile. "Just tired," she whispered, pushing peas across her plate. The silence that followed was brittle, like the pause before a glass slips from someone's hand. Then Claire, sweet, watchful Claire, tilted her head and narrowed her eyes. She was only 12, but she had that uncanny ability to sense when the air around the table had turned heavy. "Mom?" Claire's voice was tentative. She reached under the table, her small fingers curling gently around Evelyn's hand. The warmth startled her. Evelyn swallowed hard and squeezed back, trying to communicate a strength she wasn't sure she had. Mark cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. "Big day tomorrow. I'd like everyone rested," he said, stabbing into his meat with an ease that made Evelyn's stomach twist. Dana smirked faintly, her reflection flashing across the polished silver knife in her hand. Evelyn's appetite vanished. Each bite felt like gravel she couldn't swallow, each clink of silverware against porcelain louder than the next. Claire never let go of her hand, her thumb tracing circles against Evelyn's palm as though trying to soothe a wound she couldn't see. Halfway through dinner, Evelyn felt her chest tighten to the point of suffocation. She pushed her chair back softly, the legs scraping the wood floor. "Excuse me," she murmured. Nobody protested. Mark only nodded without lifting his gaze, and Dana pretended not to notice, scrolling again. Evelyn slipped away, her pulse pounding in her ears. She climbed the stairs, each step an effort, the house pressing down on her, like it knew what she'd overheard. At the landing, she paused, hand over her heart, the beat wild and uneven. She leaned into the banister, willing herself not to collapse. But then, a soft creak. From below, the den door opening again, voices rising, too faint to make out this time, but definitely there. Evelyn tightened her grip on the railing, breath caught in her throat. Had they seen her retreat? Did they know she'd heard? Her stomach dropped as she realized. If they did, she was no longer just a silent observer. she was a liability. The night pressed heavy on the farmhouse, the crickets outside chirping in nervous rhythm as though echoing Evelyn's own pulse. She sat cross-legged on the bedroom floor, the faded quilt pulled around her shoulders like a shield against the chill seeping through the old window pane. Spread before her was a neat stack of manila folders she'd dragged from the bottom drawer of the cedar chest, their corners softened with years of handling. Her fingers trembled as she flipped one open. Birth certificate, bank statement, insurance policy, and then she stilled. A thick legal envelope, the return address printed in bold county lettering. She slid it free, heart thudding as she unfolded the papers. Property tax bill, 2023. Her name sat cleanly at the top. Evelyn Harper. Not Evelyn and Mark, not joint tenancy, just her. A shiver ran through her, as startling as if the floorboards had groaned under an unseen weight. She shuffled through the rest. Deed, title, even the closing documents from years ago when she'd inherited the farmhouse and its surrounding acres. Each sheet confirmed the same truth. Everything, all 8 acres, and the weather-worn house on them, belonged to her alone. She leaned back, breath shaky, the room suddenly too quiet. Did Mark even know? He'd always spoken about our place, as if it had been purchased together, as if his hand had guided the pen on those papers. But the documents in front of her told another story, one he clearly hadn't noticed, or maybe one she had never thought to emphasize. Her ears strained for sounds from downstairs, only silence. No laughter, no murmurs, no clinking of glasses. Still, paranoia prickled her skin like static. She stuffed the papers back into their envelope and slid the bundle beneath the quilt, just as headlights swept across the wall. A knock rattled the back door. Evelyn stiffened, then hurried down the stairs, fingers curled into the edge of her sweater. She peered through the glass pane and exhaled when she saw Ruth's familiar figure, a sturdy woman in her late 50s, coat collar turned up against the night wind. Evelyn unlocked the door quickly. "Evening, Ev?" Ruth's voice carried a mix of warmth and concern. "Thought I'd drop by. Saw the kitchen light on." Evelyn forced a smile, ushering her inside. "It's late." Ruth shrugged. "I know when my friend can't sleep." She set her purse on the counter, studying Evelyn with sharp eyes. "Something's wrong." The words cracked Evelyn's composure. She poured tea just to keep her hands busy, then led Ruth to the table. Her throat tightened as she whispered about what she'd overheard in the den. Mark's low promise, Dana's cruel laugh. Ruth didn't flinch. She listened, leaning forward, fingers drumming softly against the oak surface. When Evelyn slid the envelope across the table, Ruth opened it with brisk precision. She scanned the pages, then lifted her gaze, fierce and steady. "This right here," she tapped the tax bill, "is your armor. If they're plotting, it isn't about love or loyalty. It's about this land. And these papers? They're your shield." Evelyn's mouth went dry. Shield or not, she could still feel how fragile she was. Skin thin, heart exposed. "What if they find out I know?" she whispered. Ruth reached over, squeezing her wrist. "Then you hold these tighter. Don't you dare let them out of your sight." The tea between them went cold. Evelyn sat still, staring at the envelope, her stomach tightening with each passing second. Ruth's words should have comforted her, but instead they echoed like a verdict. Everything is about the property. From upstairs came a sudden thud, sharp, jarring, unmistakably from the bedroom where she had just been. Both women froze, eyes darting toward the ceiling. Evelyn's chest constricted, every nerve alight. She hadn't left anything that could fall. She knew that sound. Someone was in her room by the time Evelyn came. Down for dinner the next evening, the house already hummed with a rehearsed sort of cheer. The table was set with care, wine glasses polished, candles lit, though the sun had barely dipped behind the pines. It was the kind of presentation Mark only bothered with when there was an agenda. Dana sat too comfortably in Evelyn's chair, lounging as though she had claimed the seat by right. She offered a sugary smile, but it never reached her eyes. "Ev," Dana chirped, sliding the casserole dish closer. "You've done such a good job keeping this place, but don't you ever feel like it's just too much? 8 acres, all that upkeep. Wouldn't it be easier to downsize?" The fork in Evelyn's hand felt heavier than it should. She set it down carefully, schooling her face into mild surprise. "Downsize?" Her voice came light, curious, though her stomach twisted. Mark leaned back, steepling his fingers like a man unveiling a plan he'd been polishing for weeks. Dana's right. You've been working hard for years, honey. Maybe it's time you enjoy yourself. No more repairs. No more late nights worrying about bills. He reached into the leather folder by his chair and slid a glossy stack across the table. Retirement village brochures, smiling seniors, sun-drenched patios, manicured lawns. Evelyn flipped one open with studied calm. Looks nice, she murmured, though each staged photograph made her throat tighten. Her eyes traced the caption, independent living, medical staff on call, stress-free lifestyle. Every word felt like a noose tightening. Dana reached forward, tapping the page. You'd make friends your own age, people to lean on, and Claire could visit whenever she wanted. Evelyn forced herself to nod faintly, as though considering, though beneath the table her fingers clenched into her lap so tightly her nails cut crescent moons into her skin. She could feel Mark's gaze, measuring her compliance, waiting for her to fold. It was Claire who shifted the balance. Quiet, deliberate, she sat 2 seats down, phone tilted against her leg. Evelyn's own phone buzzed where it lay hidden in her sweater pocket. She slid it free under the tablecloth, glancing at the screen. A single message glowed. Don't sign anything. Evelyn's breath caught, her eyes darting to her daughter. Claire didn't look up, but her shoulders were squared, her mouth set with a determination far older than 12. The words hit Evelyn harder than anything Mark or Dana could throw at her. For a heartbeat, fear gave way to steel. She closed the brochure gently and folded her hands on the table. It's certainly worth thinking about, she said smoothly, her tone neutral, betraying nothing. Mark's smile widened, satisfied, but Evelyn kept her gaze steady, a mask that cost her every ounce of strength. The meal dragged on with forced laughter and hollow small talk. Dana spun fantasies of resort-style living, of neighbors and activities, of how liberated Evelyn would feel once she let go of the burdens of land and house. Evelyn let her words float past like background noise, nodding when expected, never once giving the agreement they wanted. Later, when the dishes were cleared and Claire had retreated upstairs with her books, Evelyn slipped onto the porch where Ruth waited. The night air carried the smell of pine and damp soil, grounding her against the swell of panic still curling in her chest. They're circling, Evelyn whispered, staring into the dark yard. Every word at that table was a push. Ruth folded her arms, eyes narrowed. Of course it was. You didn't bite tonight, so next they'll sharpen the hook. If they can't convince you, they'll try to prove you're not capable of deciding for yourself. Evelyn's heart stuttered. You mean, they'll go after your capacity, Ruth said, voice flat. Doctors, lawyers, the whole play. Once they can paint you as fragile, those papers won't mean a damn thing. Evelyn's throat dried to sand. The brochures, the gentle pressure, the smirks, it was all just a prelude. From inside, the screen door creaked. Mark's silhouette filled the doorway, his smile faint but razor-sharp. Everything all right out here? Evelyn forced her lips into a curve, her pulse slamming against her ribs. Perfect, she said. But her eyes met Ruth's in the dark, and both women knew. Tomorrow, the trap would only tighten. The following morning, Evelyn parked her old sedan outside a brick office building whose windows reflected the pale winter sun. She sat for a moment with her fingers tight around the steering wheel, willing herself to breathe. The folder of documents lay on the passenger seat like a weight, heavy not just with paper, but with consequence. Inside, the law office smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. Thomas Briggs rose from behind his desk when she entered. He was graying at the temples, his frame solid, his handshake firm, someone who had spent decades steadying clients through storms. Evelyn, he said warmly, gesturing to a chair. Haven't seen you in years. What brings you in today? Her throat tightened as she set the folder down. I need you to look at these. Tell me what I'm up against. He adjusted his glasses, opening the file with practiced calm. For several minutes he read in silence. The deed, the tax bills, the inheritance papers, his brow furrowing slightly deeper with each page. At last he leaned back, folding his hands. You hold this property outright, Briggs said. No one can take that from you, unless they try a guardianship petition. The word landed like a gavel. Evelyn's fingers curled in her lap. Guardianship? Briggs nodded, his voice low. If they can convince a court you're no longer capable of managing your affairs, financial, medical, even day-to-day decisions, a guardian can be appointed. That person controls everything. Your accounts, your land, this house. He tapped the deed. And once that's in place, it's nearly impossible to undo. A chill crawled down her arms. So if Mark, if anyone, claimed I wasn't stable enough, they could move for guardianship. Briggs finished, his tone grave. It happens more often than you think. Evelyn swallowed hard, but she kept her spine straight. Then how do I stop it? You protect yourself preemptively, Briggs said. He slid a notepad toward her, jotting quickly. Schedule a full medical exam with your physician. Document that you're in good health. Then, get a notarized capacity letter, affirming you're of sound mind and judgment. Courts respect that evidence. It becomes a shield no one can easily pierce. Evelyn pressed her hands flat against her knees, grounding herself. All right, she whispered. Then stronger. I'll do it. Briggs studied her for a moment, his expression softening. You're tougher than you give yourself credit for, Evelyn. But you'll need to move quickly. If they're already circling, they won't wait long. Her pulse hammered, but she nodded. Then neither will I. That night the farmhouse was too quiet, the silence broken only by the creak of old beams settling. Evelyn moved through the kitchen, tea cooling in her hand, trying to focus on next steps. Doctor, notary, copies locked away. But her stomach knotted tighter with each tick of the clock. Upstairs, Claire lay awake, phone in hand, earbuds dangling forgotten on the quilt. She had gone to the landing for water when she heard the low murmur of voices from her parents' bedroom. The words slipped through the crack of the door, quiet but sharp. We'll make her look unstable, Mark whispered. Dana's answering laugh was hushed but cruel. She already flinches at shadows. Won't take much. Claire's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide. She backed away carefully, each step measured so the floor wouldn't betray her. Back in her room, she shut the door and pressed her phone against her chest, her heartbeat wild. She had to tell her mother, but not tonight, not with danger thick in the air. Evelyn sat at her desk, the papers from Briggs spread before her like a battle map. She traced her name on the deed with a fingertip, letting the truth harden inside her. They thought she was weak, malleable, a woman too fragile to fight. But as the house groaned around her, she lifted her chin, whispering into the quiet, "They'll regret underestimating me." And in the dark hallway just beyond her study door, unseen, the floor creaked with a slow, deliberate step. The next week began with a knock at the farmhouse door, sharp and officious. Evelyn opened it to find a courier standing stiff in his uniform, a large envelope in his hand. "Delivery for Mrs. Harper," he said flatly, holding out the packet. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't ordered anything. She signed with a shaky hand and closed the door quickly, leaning against it as if she could keep the contents at bay. For several minutes she stared at the envelope, her breath shallow, before finally tearing it open. What slid out was heavier than paper had any right to feel. A deed. Her eyes scanned the first lines, her farmhouse, her 8 acres, but then froze at the words, joint tenancy. Evelyn Harper and Mark Harper. Her knees nearly buckled. The signature scrawled at the bottom was hers, or rather, a crude imitation of it, the loops uneven, the slant wrong. "No," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, no." The walls seemed to close in. She clutched the forged deed as though it might burn her fingers, rushing to the cedar chest to compare. Her true signature on the original document was steady, precise. This was a grotesque copy, an insult inked in her name. By the time she stormed into Thomas Briggs's office, the paper was crumpled from her grip. She slapped it onto his desk, her voice breaking. "Look at this. Tell me you see what I see." Briggs adjusted his glasses, scanned the page, and his jaw set. "Forgery." His tone carried no hesitation. He pulled out his phone, already dialing. "We'll file an affidavit of fraud immediately. Whoever pushed this through crossed a line that won't be ignored." Evelyn's hands trembled, but this time it wasn't fear. It was fury. She watched Briggs draft the statement, his pen moving fast, legal terms falling into place like iron bars. "They thought they could erase me with ink," she muttered, her voice low, shaking. "They thought a forged stroke of a pen could steal my life." When she left the office, Ruth was waiting outside, bundled against the cold. Evelyn handed her the copy of the forgery. Ruth studied it for a long moment, then looked up, her expression carved from stone. "This isn't greed anymore," Ruth said. Her voice carried the gravity of a verdict. "This is theft. They're reaching into your chest, Ev, and trying to take the very heart of what's yours." Evelyn's breath fogged in the chill air, her hands still shaking, but she didn't crumble. Rage steadied her spine, a fire she hadn't felt in years burning its way through her veins. "Let them try," she said. "I'm not breaking." That evening, the house brimmed with an unease Claire could feel like static. She stayed quiet through dinner, eyes lowered, until Dana left her phone unattended on the kitchen counter. Claire slipped her own phone from her pocket, swiping it into recording mode as she drifted casually into the living room. From the kitchen came Dana's voice, carried carelessly, dripping with arrogance. "It's just a matter of time," Dana bragged to Mark. "We'll push her out, one way or another. She doesn't even realize how easy it'll be." Claire's thumb pressed the record button harder, as though her small hands alone could trap every vile word. She crept back to her room later, heart hammering, playing the file back with headphones. Dana's smug tone filled her ears, undeniable, damning. Claire stared at her screen, a new weight pressing on her chest. For the first time, she understood the depth of the danger circling her mother. She whispered into the dark, "I've got proof." Meanwhile, downstairs, Evelyn stood by the study window, clutching her copy of the fraud affidavit Briggs had filed. The glass reflected her face, haunted, hollow-eyed, but hardening. Out in the night, headlights flickered at the end of the lane, a car idling too long before disappearing into the trees. Her jaw tightened. Whoever had delivered that forgery thought she was powerless. But tomorrow, the fight would begin in earnest. What she didn't yet know was that Dana's voice, casually recorded by her daughter, would become the first weapon strong enough to cut back. The county courthouse smelled like floor wax and nerves. Evelyn sat at the petitioner's table, spine straight, palms flat on the cool wood to keep them from shaking. Across the aisle, Mark pretended ease, adjusting his cufflinks as if this were a sales call and not an attempt to gut her life. Dana sat behind him in a graphite blazer, hair sleek, mouth primed for sympathy. Judge Myers took the bench with the slow gravity of a man who'd seen too many families turn on themselves. He glanced over the file, then lifted his eyes. "Mr. Harper, you're petitioning for temporary guardianship over your wife. You may proceed." Mark stood, voice softened to a concerned lilt. "Your Honor, Evelyn's been confused. She repeats herself, misplaces important papers, leaves the stove on. Last week she drove to the grocery store and forgot why she was there." He spread his hands. "I'm worried she can't safely manage the property or herself." Dana rose when called, palms folded like a prayer. "It breaks my heart to say this, but she's declining. She cries for no reason, wanders the house at night. The acreage is too much. We've caught her standing in the yard in her robe at 2 a.m, staring at nothing. Her eyes shimmered on cue. She needs help." The words hung like fog. Evelyn let them pass through her, counted 3 breaths, then stood at Briggs's nod. Thomas Briggs's voice, when he addressed the court, was steady as bedrock. "Your Honor, we anticipated vague allegations. We came with facts." He lifted a document sealed with a thick blue ribbon. Exhibit A, a notarized capacity letter from Dr. Leah Cortez, Evelyn's primary care physician. Full physical and cognitive evaluation completed last week. Dr. Cortez concludes, "Ms. Harper is of sound mind and fully capable of managing her affairs." The judge accepted the letter, eyes skimming faster as he reached the conclusion. He arched a brow at Mark. "Mr. Harper, did you know about this evaluation?" Mark's mouth tugged, a flash of irritation before he pasted concern back on. "We weren't informed." Briggs didn't give him room to regain footing. "Exhibit B," he said, sliding a protective sleeve across the rail. "A deed that arrived by courier 2 days ago, purporting to convert sole ownership to joint tenancy with Mr. Harper. We have filed an affidavit of fraud. The signature is not Ms. Harper's. The notarization lists a Sunday date. County Recorder's preliminary review shows no record of a lawful transfer." The courtroom's low murmur snapped into silence. Judge Myers leaned forward, reading, then looked at Mark with a new, colder "Mr. Harper, explain this." Mark's throat worked. Our real estate attorney handled it. We discussed updating the deed years ago. The courier must have. What attorney? The judge interrupted. Mark blinked. He. He's retired now. Name's on my phone. Was the notary present when Ms. Harper signed? Well, it was handled off-site. I wasn't there. Myers' stare hardened. So a deed appeared out of nowhere, with an allegedly off-site notarization on a Sunday, converting your wife's land to your joint control, conveniently while you filed to take over her life? Dana shifted in her seat, composure slipping. Mark opened his mouth, shut it, opened it again. Your Honor, you're making it sound. I'm reading what's in front of me, Myers said. And what's in front of me looks like a problem. Briggs let the silence do some of his work, then stepped in with a measured calm. We ask the court to deny temporary guardianship and to refer the forged deed to the district attorney for investigation. Mark's attorney, slick suit, new haircut, the kind of confidence you rent by the hour, finally found his voice. Your Honor, we object to the characterization. Even if there's a paperwork discrepancy, my client's concern for his wife's safety stands. We request at minimum a neutral evaluation and a temporary restriction on Ms. Harper's financial decision. Judge Myers tapped his pen against the bench, thinking. The clock ticked too loudly. Claire sat at the back, small and still, hands clenched around her phone. She watched her father's jaw tighten, watched Dana's mouth flatten when the judge said the word forgery. At last Myers spoke. Here's what we're going to do. The court denies temporary guardianship at this time. He held up a hand when Mark's attorney started to rise. Sit down. The capacity letter is persuasive. The forged deed raises serious credibility issues. Clerk, prepare a referral to the district attorney's office regarding the alleged fraudulent conveyance. A vein pulsed in Mark's temple. Dana stared at the table. But, the judge continued, and the courtroom leaned in. Given allegations, however contested, of potential self-neglect, I am ordering a limited home assessment by Adult Protective Services within 48 hours. Neutral, unannounced. Miss Harper, cooperate fully. Counsel, maintain the status quo. No property transfers, no changes to accounts, and no harassment by any party. We reconvene in 10 days. Briggs inclined his head. Thank you, Your Honor. Evelyn sat down slowly. She felt the insult of the APS visit like a slap. Strangers inventorying her life, peering into her cupboards, sniffing for chaos. But beneath the sting was something solid. The guardianship was denied. The deed was headed toward people who wore badges. Judge Myers rose. We're adjourned. Chairs scraped. The bailiff called out. Mark didn't look at Evelyn as he moved toward the aisle, jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped. Dana brushed past, her perfume sour with adrenaline. Evelyn exhaled, long and even. She wasn't broken. Not today. Then Claire's text buzzed in her pocket, a single line lighting up the screen as the courtroom emptied. I recorded Dana. You need to hear it, now. Section 7. The Neighborhood Whispers. The verdict in court had given Evelyn a sliver of ground to stand on, but the retaliation came swiftly, and not from lawyers or judges. It began in whispers. At the grocery store, Mrs. Hanley from 2 farms over avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by a stack of canned beans. At church, Evelyn caught the murmur behind her pew. Soft, pitying, just loud enough to sting. And when she walked Claire to school, she saw it in the other parents' faces, the sidelong glances, the polite half-smiles that folded into frowns once she passed. By the weekend, the whispers had turned to sentences. Evelyn stood in the produce aisle when she heard it plainly. Poor thing's paranoid, a woman said, adjusting her scarf. Mark and Dana are saints for looking after her. Evelyn kept her chin high, choosing a basket of apples as though her skin weren't burning. She paid, carried her groceries, and drove home without a word. Dignity was armor, but every step felt heavier. Claire wasn't as patient. She lingered near the lockers one afternoon and overheard 2 classmates scrolling through Facebook posts. Dana's name glowed at the top of the screen. She's unraveling, Dana had written, paired with a photo of the farmhouse, its siding unpainted, porch cluttered with tools Evelyn had left out after repairs. We're trying to help, but you can't reason with someone paranoid. Pray for her? The girls snickered, scrolling further. Claire's throat tightened. She yanked her locker shut and stormed out, fingers clamped around her phone. By the time she got home, her hands were trembling with rage. They're spreading it online, Mom, she hissed, slamming the door behind her. Calling you paranoid, saying you're unstable. Evelyn closed her eyes. For a moment, she let the fury threaten her composure, then steadied. Let them talk. But it's lies. Claire's face flushed hot. Everyone at school. Claire. Evelyn placed both hands on her daughter's shoulders, forcing her to stop pacing. We fight lies with proof, not with anger. That night, Ruth arrived carrying her laptop like a weapon. She set it on the kitchen table, opening folder after folder of screenshots. Dana's been busy, Ruth muttered. Posts, comments, private messages. She's been feeding gossip like breadcrumbs. Unstable widow, unsafe alone, losing grip. She wants the town to do her work for her. So by the time she makes her next legal move, everyone believes. Evelyn's throat tightened. She scrolled through the screenshots, each one a fresh bruise. People she'd waved to at the market, nodded to in the post office, now repeating Dana's script as though it were gospel. Ruth leaned closer, her voice steel. I'm saving every one of these. This isn't just cruelty. This is defamation. And Thomas can use it. The word hung in the kitchen like a spark. Defamation. It sounded like something tangible, something that could be fought. Evelyn looked at Ruth, then at Claire, who was chewing her lip raw. Proof, she said softly. That's our weapon. 2 days later, Evelyn sat across from Briggs in his office once more. The lawyer tapped through the files Ruth had compiled, his mouth tightening with each scroll. This helps us, Briggs said at last. A smear campaign tied to the same people who presented a forged deed? It paints a clear picture. Character matters, and Dana is hanging herself in her own words. Evelyn drew a breath, slow and steady, willing her pulse to calm. So we hold the line? For now, Briggs said. But understand, Evelyn, they'll keep pushing. They want you rattled. They want you isolated. She nodded, pressing her palms together, letting the weight of his words sink in. She would not give them the satisfaction. That evening, she stood on her porch as dusk settled, the last streaks of orange draining from the sky. Somewhere down the lane, a car idled again, headlights washing briefly across the tree line before vanishing. Inside, her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Tick-tock, Ev. Everyone sees the truth now. Her breath froze. Someone had her number. Someone was watching closer than she realized. It was Saturday morning when Evelyn spotted it. A bright red and white sign staked into the frozen earth at the edge of her yard. For sale. Her stomach dropped. The farmhouse loomed behind her, silent, its windows reflecting the winter sun like startled eyes. She walked toward the sign slowly, every step dragging through the brittle grass. A business card fluttered in the wind, clipped to the board. A realtor's name, number, logo. Rage burned through the shock. She didn't call first. She drove straight to the agency. The bell above the glass door jingled as she stormed inside. A young realtor in a pressed suit looked up from his desk, startled by the force of her entrance. Evelyn slapped the card onto the counter. "Why is there a sign in my yard?" she demanded. The man blinked. "Ma'am, Mr. Harper authorized the listing. Said you were both moving into a retirement community." Evelyn's voice cut like glass. "Mr. Harper has no legal authority over my property." She pulled the folded deed from her purse and laid it flat, her fingers stabbing her own name. Sole owner, Evelyn Harper. "You've been misled? Or worse?" The color drained from the realtor's face. Before he could respond, the door swung open and Briggs entered, coat flaring, eyes sharp as steel. He crossed to the counter, his voice calm but lethal. "This listing is fraudulent. Pull it." Immediately, the realtor stammered. I had no idea." "You do now," Briggs said. "You'll issue a written withdrawal today, and you'll deliver a copy to my office. If a single showing takes place, if even one photograph goes online, your firm will face a lawsuit." The man nodded rapidly, already reaching for his keyboard. Evelyn exhaled, her pulse steadying only when the sign-up sheet was deleted from the screen. But the reprieve was short. Dana's heels clicked across the tile as she entered, her smile brittle, her tone honey-laced. "Ev, you're embarrassing yourself." Evelyn turned, jaw set. "You tried to sell my home." Dana tilted her head, feigning innocence. "We both know it's too much for you." Mark was only thinking ahead. "Change is coming whether you like it or not." She stepped closer, her whisper sharp enough to cut. "You can make this easy, or you can make it hurt." Evelyn didn't flinch. Get out of my way. Dana's smile faltered, venom flashing through the cracks. You'll regret this. Unseen behind a magazine rack, Claire held her phone low, the red recording light glowing as Dana's words bled into the microphone. Her hands trembled, but she kept still, capturing every syllable. When they finally left the agency, Evelyn slid into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel until her knuckles whitened. Claire leaned from the back seat, her voice quiet but fierce. I got it, Mom. Every word Evelyn met her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror. Pride swelled, not because Claire was forced into courage so young, but because the girl had chosen it without hesitation. Good, Evelyn whispered. We'll need it. Back at the farmhouse, Ruth was waiting with a thermos of coffee. She listened as Evelyn recounted the realtor, Briggs's intervention, Dana's threats. Claire played the recording, Dana's smug voice filling the kitchen. Ruth's lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Perfect, Ruth said. Every lie they tell, every scheme they hatch, it all leaves a trail. And the truth, Ev? She placed her hand over Evelyn. The truth has legs. Lies stumble. They'll trip over their own venom before long, Evelyn nodded, steadier than she'd felt in weeks. The smear campaign, the forged deed, the whispers in town, all of it had cut at her. But here was proof, solid and undeniable. For the first time, the scales no longer felt so tilted. But that night, when she stepped onto the porch for air, the sign was back, staked deeper this time, as though someone wanted her to know they could plant it again and again until she broke. And this time, a note was stapled to the board. You can't fight everyone, Ev. The farmhouse kitchen smelled of strong coffee and sharpened pencils, the table crowded with folders Briggs had brought that morning. Evelyn sat rigid, her palms pressed flat against the wood as though bracing herself against an oncoming wave. Briggs adjusted his glasses, sliding a stack of documents toward her. His voice was even, but the weight in it made her chest tighten. Ev, I've been digging. I pulled county filings, bank records tied to Mark. What I found? He exhaled slowly. He's been using your property as collateral. Personal loans, lines of credit, some dating back 5 years. The liens were buried deep, under his name. But the collateral listed? The farmhouse, your acres. The words hit like a fist. Evelyn's breath faltered, her hands curling into fists on the table. Collateral? That's impossible. I never signed. You didn't. Briggs tapped a page where her signature appeared in a warped scrawl. Forgery again. He's been pledging what isn't his to keep his ventures afloat. The man is drowning in debt, Evelyn. And if these loans default, the lenders come for the land. Your land. Her head spun. All the nights Mark had come home late, smelling of whiskey and expensive cologne. The unexplained absences, the sudden insistence that the farm was too much. It wasn't just greed. It was survival. For him. At her expense. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, willing herself not to cry. Betrayal ran deeper than she'd dared imagine. Across the table, Claire's eyes brimmed with tears. She clutched her phone, knuckles white. Mom, I heard him. Weeks ago. Talking on the phone. I didn't tell you because... Her voice cracked. Because I was scared. I thought if I pretended not to know, it couldn't get worse. The dam broke. Tears streaking her face as she buried her head in her arms. I didn't want you to hurt more. Evelyn moved instantly, pulling Claire against her shoulder. Baby, she whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. Listen to me. She lifted Claire's chin so their eyes locked. Don't protect me by hiding. Protect me with light. Every word you hear, every lie you catch, it's a weapon. We fight them by dragging the truth into daylight. Claire sniffled hard, nodding, her breath shuddering. Then I'll never hide again. Briggs cleared his throat gently, giving them space before sliding a new file across the table. I'm drafting a lien contest. Fraudulent signatures, falsified collateral, multiple violations. Once filed, it freezes lender action until the court decides. But this isn't small, Evelyn. These lenders are circling too. They want their money, and Mark's put your land on the line for all of it. Evelyn wiped her eyes, squaring her shoulders. Then we don't just fight Mark and Dana. We fight the whole mess he dragged in. Briggs gave a single nod, his jaw set. I'll file this afternoon. The judge will have no choice but to call an emergency hearing. The kitchen clock ticked, each second a hammer. Evelyn felt the ground shift beneath her, but for once she didn't stagger. She traced her name again on the deed in her lap, grounding herself in its ink, in its truth. Outside, wind rattled the windows, carrying the distant sound of a car accelerating down the lane. She pictured Mark behind the wheel, running from debts he could no longer cover, desperate enough to destroy her to save himself. But this time, she wasn't the one cornered. That evening, Briggs called with confirmation. His voice carried both urgency and reassurance. The judge scheduled the hearing. 48 hours. Evelyn, they'll try every trick in the book between now and then, but we're holding cards now. Proof of forgery, defamation, recordings. We'll put it all on record. Evelyn stood in the study, the farmhouse dark except for the desk lamp's golden glow. Claire leaned against the doorframe, watching her mother with cautious hope. Evelyn's reflection stared back from the glass window, eyes tired, but no longer hollow. She whispered to it, fierce and steady, "This ends in court." From the shadows outside, unseen, a camera lens blinked red. Someone was already recording. The blinking red dot from the camera haunted Evelyn long after she drew the curtains. Sleep didn't come. Every creak of the farmhouse seemed amplified, every gust of wind like a presence brushing against the glass. Yet when dawn broke, Evelyn rose with a steadier spine. If Mark and Dana thought fear would break her, they had underestimated the woman who had endured storms long before this one. Ruth arrived before breakfast, a canvas bag slung over her shoulder. She unloaded motion lights, window alarms, even a set of small cameras. "Security," Ruth said flatly, not bothering with pleasantries. "You need eyes watching back. They want you cornered, Ev. We won't let them." Evelyn helped screw the devices into door frames, grateful for the weight of her friend's resolve. By the time Claire returned from school, the farmhouse was wired with new vigilance. That night, instead of going back to her father's, Claire curled up on the couch with a blanket, phone in hand, her presence a balm Evelyn hadn't known she craved. Still, Ruth was restless. "You can't just sit here waiting for the next move," she urged. "You need to report this. Make it official." The next morning, Evelyn drove to the sheriff's office. The lobby smelled of coffee and worn leather. Sheriff Douglas, a barrel-chested man with a lined face, leaned back as she laid the stapled note and a printout of the surveillance photo on his desk. "They've trespassed," Evelyn said, her voice even. "They've planted cameras, and they left this." She slid the note forward. "You can't fight everyone, Ev." Douglas, read it, frowning. "Do you have reason to believe this was your husband or his, associate?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "I don't have reason. I have proof. Ask your deputies about the forged deed investigation. Ask the judge why my name is the only one on the property." Douglas shifted uncomfortably. "We'll look into it. I can increase patrols near the lane." It wasn't enough, but it was on the record. That mattered. Later that afternoon, Evelyn spotted Dana at the market, speaking to a knot of neighbors. Her laugh carried too far, deliberate in its brightness. Evelyn approached, groceries clutched tight against her chest. "Interesting note you left me," Evelyn said coolly. Dana blinked, wide-eyed. "Note? You can't fight everyone, Ev." Evelyn repeated the line, each word carved. Dana gasped, hand to her chest in mock shock. "My God, are you suggesting I'd trespass?" "Evelyn, that paranoia is exactly what people are worried about." But there, a flicker too fast for anyone else to catch, a tightening of Dana's jaw, a glint of satisfaction. Evelyn saw it, memorized it. She turned without another word, but Claire had been filming from an aisle over, her phone angled just enough to capture Dana's mask slipping. Another file to add to the arsenal. Back in Briggs's office, the lawyer tapped the note, the recording, the sheriff's report, his face grave but almost triumphant. "This helps us," Briggs said. "Threats establish intent. They aren't just grasping for your property anymore, they're escalating to intimidation. Judges hate intimidation. It strengthens our case." Evelyn sat taller, shoulders squared. "Good. Because I won't live scared in my own home." Her voice was iron. She believed it. That night, Evelyn stepped onto the porch alone, testing her own words against the shadows. The motion lights flared to life, flooding the yard. For a moment she felt strong, defended, unshaken. But then, just beyond the glow, a figure shifted, too far to see clearly, too still to be innocent. When she reached for her phone, the figure melted into the tree line, leaving nothing but silence and the sharp thud of her heartbeat. And on the porch railing, where her coffee cup had sat that morning, a single Polaroid photo had been left behind. It was her, captured through a window, asleep in her own bed. The leak came on a gray morning, slipped into Briggs's inbox by a contact at the county recorder's office. He printed it on thick legal paper and drove straight to the farmhouse where Evelyn and Claire sat at the kitchen table with untouched bowls of oatmeal. "Ev," he said, voice clipped with urgency. "They went further than we thought." He laid down the pages, a draft purchase contract, already circulated, stamped with the logo of Timberline Development Group. The farmhouse and all 8 acres listed as pending sale. Buyer, Timberline. Seller, Mark Harper. Evelyn stared, the words blurring before her eyes. Her name was nowhere. "They tried to sell my land to a developer?" Her voice was raw, shredded between rage and disbelief. Briggs nodded grimly. "It was scheduled for escrow next week. If this leak hadn't surfaced, you'd have woken up to bulldozers in your yard." Claire's fork clattered against her plate. "They were going to erase us," she whispered. Evelyn forced her trembling hands still against the table. "No, they won't." By noon they were in Judge Myers's courtroom again. The draft contract sat in Briggs's hand like a smoking gun. "Your Honor," Briggs said, his voice carrying over the hush of the gallery, "we bring urgent motion for injunction. My client's property is under fraudulent contract, signed without her consent, by a party with no legal authority. We move to halt any pending sale immediately." Myers's jaw tightened as he flipped through the pages. His eyes rose slowly, fixing on Mark. "Mr. Harper, did you sign this contract?" Mark shifted in his chair, sweat glistening at his temple. "It was a draft. Preliminary discussions. Developers send these things out all the time." "Answer the question," Myers snapped. "Yes," Mark muttered, barely audible. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot. "Sale halted. Effective immediately. Any attempt to proceed will be treated as contempt of this court." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Evelyn's chest loosened for the first time in weeks. The tide, long against her, finally felt as if it had begun to shift. But Briggs wasn't finished. He stepped forward, his voice lowering for impact. "Your Honor, we also move to introduce additional evidence. Direct statements by the petitioners themselves, recorded without their knowledge, discussing plans to remove Ms. Harper from her property." Myers raised an eyebrow. "Recorded by whom?" Claire stood, small and pale, her phone clutched tight. Her hands shook, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "By me, Your Honor. They didn't know I was listening." Briggs guided her to the witness stand. Claire glanced once at her mother, who gave the smallest nod. The courtroom hushed as Briggs pressed play. Dana's voice filled the speakers, unmistakable, laced with arrogance. "It's just a matter of time. We'll push her out, one way or another. She doesn't even realize how easy it'll be." A gasp swept the room. Jurors of the public leaned forward, whispers breaking like waves. Then came Mark's voice. "Once she's out, it's ours to do what we want. Developers are paying top dollar. She won't see a dime." The sound cut. Silence dropped like a curtain. Judge Myers leaned back, his face thunderous. "Enough," he said, voice trembling with controlled fury. He turned his gaze on Mark and Dana. "You brought this court-forged deeds, slandered your wife, and now, evidence of conspiracy to defraud with developers? I am ordering a full fraud probe effective immediately. Clerk, notify the district attorney's office." Today, Dana's face drained of color. Mark's jaw flexed, but the confidence was gone. They looked less like conspirators now and more like cornered animals. Evelyn sat straighter, a strength humming in her bones she hadn't felt in years. She reached for Claire's hand under the table. Her daughter squeezed back, fierce and unflinching. But as the bailiff collected the exhibits, Evelyn caught sight of a man in the back row, suit too sharp, eyes too cold. The developer's logo shone from the folder tucked under his arm. He was already watching her, and when he stood to leave, he smiled. The farmhouse smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, the kind of scent that had once meant comfort. Evelyn had spent the afternoon setting the table, laying out her mother's china, forcing herself to believe that civility might steady the chaos. Sunday dinner, a ritual, a peace offering, or perhaps just a trap she was willing to step into with her head held high. Mark arrived first, his jaw tight, eyes skimming the room but never settling on her. Dana trailed behind, draped in smug confidence, her heels clicking on the wood floor like a metronome of disdain. She smiled as she sat, but it was the kind of smile that showed teeth without warmth. The meal began in silence, knives cutting through chicken, forks scraping porcelain. Evelyn poured water, her hands steady, her face calm. She had learned that silence could be a weapon sharper than words. It was Claire who broke it. She set down her fork with a deliberate clink, her small frame taut with resolve. Her eyes burned across the table at her father and Dana. "You tried to sell our home?" she said. Not a question, an accusation. Mark flinched, but Dana leaned back, her smirk widening. "Sweetheart, you don't understand adult matters." "Yes, I do," Claire snapped, her voice ringing louder than the clock on the wall. "I've heard you. I've recorded you. You lied to the judge. You lied to everyone. Grandma isn't crazy," her hands clenched in fists on the table. "You are cruel." Dana's mask cracked, her face twisted, venom flashing through her voice. "Watch your mouth, little girl." Claire didn't back down. She leaned forward, her voice trembling but fierce like a blade too young to dull. "No, you watch yours, because every word you say can be played back in court." Evelyn's heart swelled with equal parts pride and sorrow. She reached under the table, her hand finding Claire's, squeezing once, grounding her. Evelyn kept her tone level, her gaze steady as she finally spoke. "This is my home," she said softly, her calm cutting deeper than any shout. "My name is on every document. My blood is in this soil. You tried to erase me, but I'm still here. And I will remain." Mark's fork slipped against his plate, the clatter betraying the crack in his composure. He opened his mouth, closed it again. For the first time, his silence wasn't power. It was defeat creeping in at the edges. Dana rose abruptly, her chair scraping hard against the floor. Her eyes narrowed into slits, her voice sharp enough to slice the air. "You think this is over because a judge scolded us? You think a child with a phone scares me? You have no idea what you're up against." Evelyn met her gaze without blinking. "I do now. And that's why you'll lose." For a moment, the farmhouse held its breath. Then Dana snatched her coat from the chair and stormed toward the door, heels striking the floor like gunshots. The slam rattled the window panes. Mark remained seated, his shoulders slumped, his knife idle beside his untouched chicken. He didn't look at Evelyn, didn't look at his daughter. The man who had once commanded every room he entered now seemed small, cornered. Claire's hand tightened around Evelyn's. "She's scared," the girl whispered. Evelyn nodded, her eyes fixed on the door Dana had just slammed through. "Good." But when she turned back to the window, she saw headlights lingering at the end of the drive. Not Dana's car, a different one. Engine idling, lights burning into the night like watchful eyes. And Evelyn realized the family battle might be fracturing, but the developer's shadow still loomed larger than all of them. The next evening, the farmhouse windows glowed golden against the dusk. Evelyn stood at the sink rinsing plates when the sudden wash of red and blue lights bled across the walls. For a moment, she thought her chest might split, panic rushing through her like cold water. But then she heard it, the sharp crunch of tires in gravel, the heavy slam of cruiser doors. She stepped to the porch in time to see Sheriff Douglas striding up the driveway, deputies flanking him. Dana's Lexus sat at the edge of the yard, engine still running. Dana was already outside the car, arms crossed, a smirk curling her lips as though this were another performance. It ended quickly. The sheriff read her rights while a deputy snapped handcuffs around her wrists. The smirk broke, her voice rising shrill against the night. "This is harassment. Do you know who I am?" The neighbors knew. They had gathered at the end of the lane, their faces pale in the sweep of the patrol lights. Murmurs spread like wildfire as the scene unfolded, gossip no longer shaped by Dana's whispers, but by the weight of her humiliation. Mark stumbled from the passenger seat, his face flushed and panicked. "This is a mistake," he stammered, tugging at the sheriff's sleeve. This isn't." Douglas pulled his arm free. "Forgery, fraud, attempted unlawful transfer of property. It's all on the record now." Mark froze, his mouth open, his hands trembling uselessly at his sides. Evelyn stood silently on the porch, her posture tall, her face unreadable. She did not gloat. She did not smile. She simply bore witness as justice, long delayed, finally reached out its hand. Dana's shrieks carried across the yard as deputies guided her toward the cruiser. "This isn't over, Ev. You'll regret this. You'll—" The car door slammed, cutting her off. The night settled into the hum of idling engines. Mark stood in the middle of the gravel driveway, his shoulders sagging, his shirt untucked, the air of a man unraveling. For once, his words failed him. The neighbors who once nodded at his stories now stared openly, judgment plain in their eyes. Behind Evelyn, the screen door creaked. Claire slipped onto the porch and pressed herself into her grandmother's side, arms wrapping tight around her waist. Evelyn felt the girl's heartbeat thudding against her, fast and desperate. "You did it," Claire whispered fiercely. "You beat them." Evelyn smoothed a hand over her granddaughter's hair. Her eyes remained on the flashing lights, her expression calm but heavy. She had won? Yes, but the cost still rippled beneath her skin. Later, inside, Briggs sat at the table with the weight of the evening spread before him. Papers, affidavits, court orders stacked neatly beside his cooling coffee. He looked at Evelyn across the lamplight, his tone measured but not unkind. "Your property is safe now," he said. "The forged deed, the fraudulent contracts, they're dead in the water. The DA will see to it. The farm is yours, beyond dispute." Evelyn nodded slowly, the truth both a relief and a wound. "And the family?" Briggs exhaled, leaning back. "That's harder. Courts can rule on land. They can't mend blood." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with steady resolve. "Then we leave the court to its work. And we keep our own house strong." Claire reached across the table, small fingers gripping hers. Evelyn held tight, anchoring herself in that simple bond. When the cruisers finally rolled away and the lane fell quiet again, Evelyn stepped back onto the porch. The air was cool, damp with the promise of rain. The farmhouse behind her hummed with its usual creaks and sighs, no longer a battlefield, but still scarred. She let out a long breath, a sound halfway between relief and mourning. For the first time in months, she felt the grip on her chest loosen. But as she lifted her gaze to the tree line, she caught the faint glow of headlights retreating deeper into the woods. Not the sheriff's, not Dana's Lexus. The developer had been watching too. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, slipped through the farmhouse mail slot without ceremony. Evelyn nearly left it on the hall table with the grocery ads and utility bills, but the handwriting stopped her cold. Marks, slanted, rushed, a little too heavy on the downstrokes. She carried it to the kitchen, sat at the table, and slid it open with a paring knife. The paper inside was lined, pulled from a yellow legal pad. His words sprawled unevenly, as if poured out. In a hurry before courage could falter. "Ev, I never meant for it to get this far. I was drowning, and I thought if I just kept moving, I'd find air. Instead, I dragged us all under. I was weak. I was greedy. I was afraid of failing, of losing everything I'd promised you. So I gambled with what wasn't mine to give. I see that now. I see it too late. Dana pushed, but I let her. I let her because it was easier than facing my own ruin. I don't ask forgiveness. I only ask you. Remember, I was more than this mistake once, more than the man who sold you out. For Claire's sake, don't erase me completely." The page ended abruptly, the ink trailing as though the weight of confession had sapped him. Evelyn sat motionless for a long time. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the windows, rattling the panes. She read the words again and again. Part of her heart ached at the tremor of humanity in them. The man she had once loved, laid bare in cowardice and shame. But another part, sharper, remembered the nights of whispered plotting, the forged signatures, the Polaroid of her sleeping in her own home. She was a mother. She was also a woman wronged, and the two sides warred inside her. Claire padded into the kitchen, her hair loose from braids, homework tucked under her arm. She spotted the letter and froze. "Is that from Dad?" Evelyn folded the page, her fingers tightening. "It is. What did he say?" "That he's sorry. That he was weak. That he was afraid." Evelyn's voice was even, but the words scraped her throat. Claire's eyes softened, then clouded. "Are you going to forgive him?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She stared at the farmhouse walls, every beam, every nail, every echo of the life she had fought to protect. Forgiveness wasn't a word that fit easily in her mouth. Claire slid into the chair beside her, her voice hushed but urgent. "Please don't shut him out forever. He's still my dad. I know he's awful. He hurt you. He scared us. But he's still him. I just don't want to lose both parents at once." Evelyn closed her eyes. A mother's heart bent toward the plea, but the woman in her bristled against the betrayal. At last she reached for Claire's hand, threading their fingers together. "I won't shut him out," she said slowly. "But he will never control this house again. He will never sign another paper for me. If he wants to see you, it will be here, with me present. Those are the boundaries. That's how we survive this." Relief flooded Claire's face. She leaned into her grandmother, hugging her tightly. Evelyn held her, the letter still pressed beneath her palm on the table, its weight both anchor and burden. That night, after Claire had gone to bed, Evelyn placed the letter in the cedar chest with the deeds and affidavit, the archive of every wound and every triumph. She closed the lid firmly as though sealing away not just papers, but the decision she had made. Compassion tempered by armor. The farmhouse felt quieter, steadier. For the first time in months, Evelyn sipped tea without looking over her shoulder, but when she went to draw the curtains, she froze. Another envelope sat on the porch railing, caught beneath a rock. No handwriting this time, just her name, printed neatly, and stamped in the corner. Timberline Development Group. Thanksgiving morning came in crisp and blue, a sky scrubbed clean after a night of rain. The farmhouse breathed out the smells of butter and sage, onions softening in a cast-iron skillet, stock simmering low on the back burner. Laughter floated from the living room, real, unforced, threaded with the chatter of a parade on the TV and the clink of dishes being set out in the dining room. Evelyn took her time coming down the stairs, one palm over the smooth banister worn by years of hand. In the front room, a rocking chair waited near the picture window. It had been her mother's, then hers, shuffled to a corner in rougher months, as if the house itself hadn't been sure she belonged. Today, she drew it forward where the light fell warm across the floorboards and sat, the chair creaking in a steady, comforting rhythm. Chosen, not exiled. "Grandma!" Claire skidded to a stop in socked feet, cheeks flushed from running a relay between rooms. She held up a place card she'd cut from brown cardstock and edged with tiny gold leaves. In careful block letters, she'd written, "Grandma Evelyn, head of table." Evelyn felt something give in her chest, not a break, but a release. "Head of table?" she teased softly. Claire lifted her chin. "It's your house, your name, your seat." From the kitchen, a sheepish voice called, "And my turkey might not survive without supervision." Ben, broad-shouldered, teased by gray at the temples, stood over the roasting pan in an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," in peeling red letters. He looked up with a smile that didn't quite hide his nerves. "Okay, the basting schedule you left is intense. Respect the schedule," Evelyn said, deadpan, and Ben actually laughed. A few months ago, he'd kept his distance, skimming the headlines of gossip and calling less often. He'd shown up last week with flowers and a quiet apology he didn't force into a speech. Today, he had rolled up his sleeves and asked for the to-do list like penance. Ruth breezed in with pies balanced on her forearms and a stack of folding chairs squeaking for mercy. "Apple, pecan, and the pumpkin you pretend not to like," she announced, kissing Evelyn on the cheek. She set the pies down, eyes twinkling. "And yes, I peeked. No more Timberline letters in the mailbox. Briggs said the DA's subpoenas were like ice water on their bonfire." Evelyn nodded, a small gratitude. The envelope from the developer, cool, impersonal, had gone to Briggs the hour she found it. He'd replied with filings and a set jaw. The paper war wasn't over, but the farmhouse walls felt thicker now, the floor beneath her surer. Claire set the card at the head of the table with ceremony. She had made others, Ruth, Ben, Claire, and left one blank at the far end, a white rectangle like a silence. Dana's name had no place here. The seat would stay empty. As the afternoon slid toward gold, family and neighbors trickled in. A couple from church with sweet potatoes, the kid from next door who'd been mowing their lawn since summer, a pair of firefighters who'd found themselves spending off-duty hours with Ben over strong coffee and long stories. The house swelled with people who had seen the ugliness and chosen to come anyway. They crowded the kitchen doorway while Ben hauled the turkey to the cutting board. "Moment of truth," he muttered. "Don't butcher it," Ruth warned. "I Googled a diagram," he confessed, cheeks coloring. "Consider me humbled." He carved, hands steadying as he went, slices fanning under his knife. The bird was perfect, skin lacquered, meat tender. Someone started plating. Someone else mashed potatoes with a flourish like a drumline. Claire darted around refilling glasses, a commander with a ponytail, and a mission. When everything was set, they took their seats. Evelyn waited until the murmurs quieted and the silverware stilled. She rose, the room lifting its eyes to her as if the ceiling itself bowed a little. She held her glass. "I have words," she said, and a ripple of laughter went through the room. She let it settle, then continued. "This house has held its breath for a long time. It learned too many secrets. It watched people I loved try to pull it out from under me, and it watched the rest of you nail the floorboards back down." Her gaze found Claire. "We kept proof when lies tried to smother us. We stayed when whispers tried to shame us." Claire's eyes shone. Ben looked down at his hands. Ruth squeezed Evelyn's elbow under the table. "To family," Evelyn said, her voice low and clear, "the kind that remembers who you are when you forget. And to truth, slow-footed some days, but it survives." Glasses lifted. "To truth," they echoed. They ate. Warmth settled over the room like a quilt. Gravy passed, stories shared, a ridiculous argument about cranberry sauce jellied versus whole berry that ended with a compromise of both. The parade gave way to football. Someone dozed in an armchair. The rocking chair kept its patient rhythm under Evelyn, the motion grounding her in the simplest way. Back and forth. Breathe in, breathe out. Later, as dusk took the windows and the porch light blinked on, Claire slipped a new card beside the one at Evelyn's plate. This one didn't go at a seat. It went in front of the rocking chair, propped on the arm. Home. Evelyn traced the letters with her thumb. The fire snapped in the hearth. Outside, the yard lay quiet, only the stubble of fields and the thin line of woods beyond. No headlights, no watchers, just the long, low hum of a house at peace. Dana was absent, her future a tangle Evelyn wouldn't attempt to comb out tonight. Mark had sent another letter, shorter, softer. Boundaries held. Visits would be measured. Control surrendered. It would never be simple. It would finally be safe. Evelyn leaned back, the chair's creak an old lullaby. She watched her people laugh, argue gently, pass pie like a sacrament. When she lifted her glass one last time, it was to no one and everyone at once. To family that remembers, and to truth that survives. A hush, then a smile traveling the table like a candle catching wick to wick. In the quiet that followed, Evelyn let the final thought come the way breath comes, unforced and true. "They said I wouldn't last the year. I lasted, stronger than them all."